Hey, welcome back to another exciting episode of Spellstorm Miniatures. My name is Jeremiah.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Chad.
And we are a show about miniature war games, including War Machine and Hordes by Privateer Press. Our goal here is simply to inspire you to play more. Hey, gentlemen, it's good to chat with you again today. We have an exciting topic today to talk about, which I'm pretty excited about. And it's good to be recording again, on the regular. Before we get to our big topic, which I'm calling extra crispy tenders.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that.
I saw that.
I got a story that goes with that.
Okay.
But before we get to that topic, have you guys played any games lately?
Not I. This is all you two. It's been a week of just taking care of stuff, cleaning, getting back ready for school starting up. So,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was a quick turnaround from our last episode to this one.
Yeah. I haven't gotten to play very many games other than a couple more games of Commander and a couple more games of King's Dilemma. The one person, Michael, that my roommates and I have been playing King's Dilemma with the last few weeks, came over New Year's Eve night. He was going to bring his fiance, but she wasn't able to make it because she had to work on New Year's Day. So he came over. We played a couple games of Commander, and we were trying to decide what to do. And all of us were kind of like, I don't really care. And one person was like, I mean, we could play King's Dilemma. It's right there. And it's like, do you want to play it? He's like, I don't really care. It's like, it kind of sounds like you want to play it. He's like, I don't really care. I was just putting it out there. We're like, no, it sounds like you want to play it. So let's just play it. So
I don't care if we play, but it's right there if we want to open it up. I mean,
exactly.
It's really play, but
so we played a couple more games of that. So we're up to like almost 10 sessions in, and I think we finally got. So there's a spot on the side of the board for different stories that are happening, and there's like 5 different sections basically. And the way that you finish the way that you get towards the end game is you complete one of those story sections that's on the side of the board, and it has you put a secret sticker from the back of the rules book onto another area. And when you get one story completed for each one of those little areas on the side of the board, that's when it triggers the end of the game. And I think we're about halfway through the stickers. I think we've gotten 3 of 6, and we just started a storyline for the final one that we hadn't started yet. All of the other sections have stories started and going on them with reoccurring storyline dilemmas that continue what's happening based off of the different decisions and things like that. And so we finally got the last one. So we're like finally starting to move into some of the final stages of the game as we move to kind of like the last probably about 5 to 7 more playthroughs, I think, before we finish it. So
wow.
It's been interesting. It's been a lot of fun. It's a really cool game. So if you've got a play group that can play kind of consistently, that likes political voting legacy games, I highly recommend checking out King's Dilemma. It's super cool.
Nice. Well, I've been sort of, tracking as you've been talking about it. It might be one that I'll eventually want to pick up and play. So, yeah. Cool.
And it doesn't really I think some other legacy games, the game kind of gets more quote unquote difficult as the game goes on. Like Pandemic Legacy, for example, as the game goes, there are times where you can lose characters or lose cities and things like that because of something that previously happened. And this doesn't really have that. Actually, kind of as you go on, the houses gain a little bit more and more power as you have more positive and negative stickers that affects some of your resources you get at the start of the game, some of the different goals that are on your house board. So one of the things that I have for my house is if I complete 3 games, or every time you complete a game that has one of these things, You fill in a little box, and then when you fill the final one, then you get the bonus. So the one that I've completed is the if the knowledge resource is the highest resource at the end of the game, I fill in a box, and after I get 3 of those, I get this bonus. One of them gives me a prestige right away, which helps determine basically like the power of my house at the start of the game. And then at the beginning of every game, I get 2 extra gold that you can use to make bribes and barters and deals and things like that. Or there's other times where you're using your money for some sort of an event in the game. So that's like one of the cool things. And all of those different little goal things on the boards is different for every house. Everyone has their own goals, their own objectives that they're trying to go after. So as time has gone on and we've unlocked some of these things through various things happening, we're all getting stronger as the game goes rather than the game getting more difficult from like Pandemic Legacy.
Yeah. That's definitely a different way of rules design. Yeah. I this last week, a bunch of Commander still. It was Christmas break, for the winter break or whatever, and so the boys have been really deep in Commander, and but then we did get one game Frostgrave in, and we decided that we would actually go back and create all new level 1 wizards. And so I picked a school that I haven't generally played a lot, and that's the Soothsayer. And so it was kind of fun to be able to do that. And I also hired differently in my warband because one of the things that Oz does is he spams like barbarians and treasure hunters, which all have +4 fight to begin with. And so it's fun to be able to actually consider fighting him back. That's how I get stomped.
Classic Oz wants to be a bully in the game.
I'm trying to play scenario, and he just wants to kill my guys.
Yep.
So I ended up, 5 of my guys ended up dying, and I had to roll on the death table for them, and none of them died permanently, nor any of them gain a permanent injury. So
that's good.
Yeah, I got really lucky there, but
yeah.
But yeah, so I'm a big fan of Frostgrave, and I imagine as we pivot to our main topic, I'm probably gonna invoke the name of Frostgrave a few times in our conversation today.
I would imagine.
But here's the story. So Oz and I, whenever I want something from him, I need to bribe him with food, and so we had to go run an errand, and then we had to go to the storage place, to get our Christmas bins back. So we were de-Christmasing the house, you know what I mean? And so we've been out for a few hours, and it's around a meal time, and so we decided to roll through Kentucky Fried Chicken. And so we're going through the drive-through there, and he sees the sign, and he goes, "Extra crispy tenders," and he doesn't have a context. He doesn't realize that no, there's like original recipe, there's crispy, and then there's extra crispy tenders, And so we had this whole conversation about KFC chicken. But when I think about rules, and which is what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about, first we're going to get some definitions, but rules sometimes can be described as crunchy, and we've all played a lot of games that we would describe as crunchy, and in some games we would even describe as extra crispy, crunchy. So, but we want to talk about that today, and we want to kind of do a little compare and contrast, and see the merits of rule sets and design, game design, and things like that. But before we get there, like we should probably figure out what words we want to use to talk about what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. Well, and also too, to keep in mind that this isn't necessarily just restricted to only miniatures games. A lot of the stuff that we'll talk about is probably going to also fall into like differences between role-playing systems and stuff like that. So, think about the discussion as you think about some of your own games, listeners moving forward, and kind of think to yourself too, like what do you think makes a game like more crunchy or like a lighter, easier experience? So crunchy is kind of the primary term that I think we'll be throwing around a lot. And when I think of it personally, I think of something that is more complex. It's not quite as simple. A crunchy rule system usually has a lot of little layers or a lot of little things that you're kind of bookkeeping, and having to keep track of to add all together before you get to a final ability check or a final rules resolution or something like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
I kind of agree along that. And I love how you're throwing air quotes on the crunchy. Great.
Oh yeah. Great, great radio for crunchy. Everyone can see me doing it.
Yeah.
Use your imagination. We're still kids.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's what I was kind of thinking of too when I thought of like crunchy is like you said, a lot of bookkeeping, a lot of tracking. There's a lot going on. You could even think of it a lot of number crunching, right? Mm-hmm. You've got things and totals to keep track of, and there's multiple layers before you actually know, like you said, the result.
Yeah.
So
I think another term that falls along in with that is probably min-maxing, which a lot of people may use as describing people's style of character creation, which is minimum input for maximum output. Kind of most bang for your buck is kind of the similar idea that.
Although I would
think
say
that probably.
Yeah, I would say that min-maxing is more of a player thing versus a rule set thing.
But I think when
it comes to my working definition for crunchy, I think, is how many times do I have to flip through the rule book to figure out what I'm doing here? And so if I have to keep flipping, like to find this rule set embedded in this rule, embedded in this rule, embedded in this rule.
Yeah.
If I have to have 4 books to figure out how to do this one thing, I'm going to call that kind of crunchy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So like you say, and crunchy and another, like tight rule system can be a little bit different. So
yeah,
I'd say
tight
rule and necessarily crunchy. Just a definition will probably be thrown around as crunchy, tight, loose, light rules. Yeah.
And I think a tight rule set, or something that is a tight, I was about to do air quotes again. Something that is a tight rule set is probably kind of along the lines of precision is key or precision is king, where something that's loose is a little bit probably like kind of more narrative attributed, or it's a little bit more kind of like flexible as far as what you can do based off of a certain situation. A lot of scenarios in some role-playing games like D&D or other things, some certain scenarios within for like ability checks, for example, can have kind of a loose application or a looser application, whereas other things of like if I hit someone with a sword, it's a very kind of tight application of like this is the thing that it's doing.
Yeah. I think crunchy and light represents like one axis, and then tight and loose represents another axis. Like you can have a crunchy rule set that's really tight, but you can also have a crunchy rule set that's loose and like really ambiguous, and so I think if we use those 4 words and kind of give a working definition as we use those words, then I think we can have this conversation.
Yeah, and I like that definition. Like I said, you have the 4 quadrants. Where are you kind of landing in those? We could say most games kind of do. So I said, crunchy is a lot of our numbers. Tight's kind of our very specific rule sets. This happens. There's like little interpretation of rules, right?
Yeah.
Light, we're going with, So loose rules, I guess, would be the opposite of the tight rules, right? So our loose rules are a lot of interpretation. Like I think of Munchkin when I think about something like that. It always says if you can't agree on a rule, just argue about it. Maybe maybe there's a there's a lot more interpretation to the rules. Sounds right to you guys? Like the rule set's there, it's not necessarily crunchy or it's not necessarily light, but there's a lot of open-ended questions to it, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things that makes a rule set tight is if they use a word, like a keyword, it has the same meaning in every context. And so if you read this word or this ability and it means the same thing in all the time, I feel like that's a tight rule set.
Yeah.
I've read rule books where they've used a word and on one page it's bold, the next page it's not bold, and it almost has two different meanings, you know, or capitalized or whatever. It just depends on the editing, on how they want to format the rules. But I think consistency helps to make a tighter rule set as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about this crunchy thing. What makes a rule set crunchy, in your opinion? Like, let's flesh it out a little bit more.
I guess an example that I think of as like a crunchy RPG is Shadowrun, for example, is kind of thought of, or 3.5 D&D was also considered, and the original Pathfinder considered to be very crunchy rule systems. And I think some of that has to do with the amount of different things that you're bookkeeping, the little intricacies of the way that rules interact with each other, and the complexities there. One of the reasons why I think it's availability of access of different abilities. So like if you have a lot of different things that you can do with a character and designing the character and the abilities you want them to have, I think it can make this system more crunchy, especially when those abilities start piggybacking onto other abilities, having prerequisites of, you have to have this other ability in order to gain this one. And in order to have that one, you have to have a certain strength stat or something like that. And then also just the amount of like different abilities and things like that. I always remember playing 3.5, and over on the side of the sheet, there's the long list of all the different abilities that you could put points into. And that always felt very complex to me because you would have multiple rules that would be kind of similar, but they're still different. So like climbing and swimming, you would think would be kind of similar, but they're not. Use rope and sleight of hand, you would think would be kind of similar, but they're not. And one of the differences going in the way that changed in 3.5 to 5th edition of D&D is a lot of those abilities kind of got collapsed into the same thing. So you don't have swim or climb or perform. Well, you have perform, use rope, stuff like that. They kind of fall into like perform, investigation, athletics versus dexterity, like, and you kind of use your interpretation of what action it is that you're doing to determine which ability you should use, rather than just having a strict, I have a 52 in rope climbing. It's like when I think that the diversity of different abilities can be a strong attribute to whether or not a system is crunchy, if you have a lot of different things that you can do and a certain path that you kind of have to follow sometimes.
Yeah, definitely all those things to keep track of. I was thinking in the miniature world, of course, we go to like War Machine Hordes. I think of it as very crunchy because you can have a lot to keep track of.
Yeah. And they just introduced a new CID rule for one of the Crucible Guard.
Oh yeah, the new Crucible Guard army.
You have 3 numbers that you can choose to assign your speed, your strength, or your Matt. What it is? Yeah, that's fun.
Just
hey, this turn I'm gonna be speed 7. Next turn I'm gonna be speed 6.
Start with game with speed 8, get up the field, and then you won't have to worry about it because you're never going to be speed 8 again. But it's like I said, there's just so much to keep track of. In the D&D, you're saying like 3.5, a lot of different abilities to do. Like I said, I think War Machine Hordes, there's the rolling of the dice. You may not be doing too much math because you're rolling, you add your mat to your dice, then you compare. It's maybe not as that, but like I said, you have so many tokens you're dealing with, right? So many different factors to deal with. Does that unit have stealth? Does that unit, have a good defensive ability? Do I have multiple wounds on this character? Do I have a prey token or a whatever token? All sorts of things, right? How much focus or fury do I have on these beasts? Like, you have tokens everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so I would bring that into kind of a crunchy feel. Is there's just so much going on.
Yeah. One of the things, though, I guess counterpoint is the combat action that's required in War Machine and Hordes is pretty simple.
Yeah.
It's roll to attack, roll your damage. And then the defender can roll for tough or some other, if they have that ability and stuff.
Yeah.
It's only 2 rolls.
Mm-hmm.
Where like when you compare to like 40K, you're gonna roll a bunch to hit. Then you roll a bunch to wound, hopefully, because hopefully you hit a bunch, right? And then the defender is gonna roll a save, and then at the end of the round, they're gonna roll a morale, and they're gonna have to keep track of all that stuff throughout the round, as well. And so, I mean, I think every game has things that they need to keep track of.
Yeah.
It's just how is it organized, and how much of it is crucial to the gameplay. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'm glad that you both brought up the dice rolling as an attribute of making attacks, because this is also something that I thought about, and I consider when you look at the rules and things like that. Personally, I feel like the dice rolling for making attacks in War Machine and Hordes is more simple, but the complexities of making sure that you get buffs in place, debuffs in place, making sure you're using either the correct type of attack or the correct type of unit that maybe specializes more in melee attacks versus ranged attacks against, the target that you're targeting. Those are all crunchy in the aspect of making sure that everything lines up properly, but then your resolution of the attack is usually 1 or 2 dice rolls. Whereas in 40K, I feel like that resolution of the rolls is more time consuming because it's a lot of rolling back and forth, but I feel like that resolution is also kind of more loose or more lax, because instead of trying to do math of dice averages and things like that, you want the opposite. You want spikes. You want high rolls all the time. Whereas in War Machine, you don't want that. And bringing in the dice math and averages and things like that are 2 very different things when you look at those 2 different games. Yeah. And the fact that you can very easily just look at a unit in Warhammer 40K and say, oh, their weapon skill is 3+, so I just roll all of these dice, and everything that's a 3 up hits, and then you move into the wounding stage. Whereas in War Machine, you have to do the math of, okay, I'm a mat 6 against a defense 14. I need to roll an 8 on 2 dice. How can I make that better so that I don't have to roll an 8? I can make this resolution easier and more concise or more consistent. Whereas, it's quality over the quantity. With 40K, it's very much like you're chucking handfuls of dice. That is a common thing that is said about Warhammer all the time, is that you're chucking lots of dice, and it's really kind of that throw as many as you can and hope for the best, because it's a more simplistic what it is you're trying to get in order to hit an attack. Yeah.
Well, and you're talking about those buffs and debuffs and stuff, having those in place. I think that's how each game handles those is different.
Yeah.
And how that gets organized. So, like, for example, War Machine has cards for each one of their characters. And there's stuff on the front and there's stuff on the back, and one of the things that I really appreciate about the 3rd edition of Malifaux is they have the same thing. They have cards with information on the front, information on the back. The way that they organize their cards and the way that they simplified certain abilities that crews can do based on their keyword and things like that it's very easy for you to look at the front of the card and know what this character is about.
Yeah.
And then you flip over to the back and you know what kind of actions they can take. And so how you communicate the information is key. You can have, like I would call Malifaux. I think I would call Malifaux a pretty tight rule set.
Yeah.
And I think I would, because, it's pretty clear about what it does. The pronouns, or when it says you know what you're doing, right? Kind of thing. And then, but I would also say that the actual gameplay is light.
Yeah.
Just because it's, I go, you go, and I have a certain number of actions. You have a certain number of actions. It's the complexity falls in the depth of the game, not in the actual rule set.
Yeah.
I'd kind of agree with you there too. As I was thinking about Malifaux, I was a little undecided because it's semi crunch it lifts it a little bit just from the the scheme markers. You're tossing scheme markers here and there, like you said, the alternating activations, plus kind of simplicity of rules on them is, like you said, tight. I'll agree, and then it's been on the lighter side. I would agree on that as well.
Well, and you just brought up something else too. So all of the games that we're talking about, they have their core rule set, that this is how you play the game. And then each model or data sheet or whatever, if you're talking about 40K, each unit has like what they can do. But then there's like a third element to a lot of these games, and that is like their competitive pack. So so like War Machine, what do we have? We have the Steamroller. Malifaux has Gaining Grounds. Infinity has ITS.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start adding that other layer to it, then it's like, okay, here's how to play the game. Here's how to use your models in that game. And now you have to try to fit it into this format, play on these scenarios, go, good luck. And so, there's some of that stuff's pretty crunchy. I think the hardest thing about Infinity is list building and playing in the scenarios. Like, that's challenging. And it's like, I don't know how to build a list. I still don't know how to build lists. I just throw models together, but I know how to play the game. Like, I know how my actions work, and I can read, the profile of a character, and I can in theory know what they do. You know what I mean? But Infinity has a whole host of skills too, that and things that make it really complex.
Yeah, I was gonna say Infinity to me was on the tighter side, but also a bit crunchier, like you said, because there are a lot of interactions to do, and the fact that it's always your turn, right, is kind of their tagline. You can fire back. I haven't checked out N4, so I'm just basing off of N3, but I would agree that it's a little bit more crunchy, but then it's not as super much to keep track of as some games can be.
Infinity's good in terms of like you, everything on the table, exactly what's happening, and there's it's easy to stay on top of it,
right?
Where like a lot of times in Malifaux or in War Machine or even 40K, I'll forget something's in play.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll forget this, and I'm like, and it, it's like, I shouldn't have done that. You know what I mean? Because there's just so much to keep track of, both on your side of the table and your opponent's side.
Yeah.
Well, and that's always also another layer to complexity for games is how deep is the catalog? If you're talking about miniature games, how deep is the catalog of different miniatures, and how many different factions are there, different styles of play? Remembering all of that stuff, that's always been one of the larger barriers of entry for War Machine and Hordes. Is it's very difficult. It's easy to learn the rules of the game and learn what it is your faction does or how they play, but then remembering what everyone else does and how everyone else plays is another one of the complexities that adds to it.
Yeah, I agree. Like you bring up the catalog, and there's hundreds of models in some games. Again, we're just talking about Infinity, War Machine, Malifaux. I mean, Malifaux, there might not be as much as those other two, but 40K, I'm sure, just thousands of models, right? Almost, right? But in somewhat of that vein, and just because I have BattleTech on the mind, I was thinking about BattleTech, and I mean, you can build your mechs, so many different ways, right? But would that
BattleTech makes my brain hurt.
Yeah, but see, to me, it's
the epitome of crunch right there.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a little bit debated on BattleTech being crunchy or not. What do you guys think? Kind of.
I feel like it is.
Think so?
What do you think, Chad?
I have very little interaction. I haven't actually read the rules. The majority of the stuff that I have seen, I've seen secondhand. Basically, I've seen people playing it. There's a regular group that used to come into the store of about 5 or 6 people that would come in for a couple of hours, play a game. But so the reason why it looks very crunchy to me, for example, seeing the amount of dice that they have, different coloring for dice, listening to them resolve attacks that are using specific weapons that do certain amounts of damage, and the fact that every single one of the mech sheets has a chart and tracking for where things are damaged, how likely you are to hit in certain places. Now that those things are damaged, how does that affect the way that your mech continues to work? And it's been put very simply is like BattleTech is the miniatures game that plays like a simulation. It is very precise. It is very crunchy. It is very deep in the construction of even just a single mech, as far as if you're customizing it to do certain things. And so I would agree. I hadn't even thought about BattleTech when I was preemptively thinking about these different things, but I think BattleTech is probably one of the pinnacles of definition of a crunchy miniatures game, as far as the amount of work that goes into even just building a list. But playing a game, there's just so much more to it.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. It's so math intensive. Their tracking is easy, and I always, there's the old trick of using 2 different colored dice on your mech for if you jumped, ran, because they have different modifiers. Of just using 2 different dice to see attack modifier versus defense modifier. Early trick I learned way on, helps a lot. But you're all compact into a sheet, so you don't have a bunch of tokens on the table, but you have just math, more math.
Yeah.
And
well, and I'm watching these guys sit there with basically like a stack of paper for all their mechs that's like clipped together in the corner that they're just like constantly flipping back and forth through, and I'm just like oh my gosh, my head is spinning. I'm just gonna walk away.
But
I would play that.
Yeah. Well, it also probably goes to kind of attribute to it is one of the guys that is part of that group he's an aerial mechanic engineer. He's going to school and working at the Hillsborough Airport in their aviation to be an airplane mechanic. Okay. And he's like, I love this stuff. Like this is exactly what I want.
Yeah. I'll get hooked. The rules aren't that complicated too. It's just like you said, it can get very, very crunch-tastic, right?
Yeah.
Well.
One other thing I wanted to post to you guys as kind of a difference or another thing to talk about as far as like what is crunchy or what is tight and loose as part of a rule system is how do you guys feel that movement, just moving your pieces around the battlefield, affects whether or not a game is crunchy or loose?
That's a good question. Because as I've been getting into Infinity, every profile has their move stat is 2 numbers. So a common move stat would be 4-4. And so a movement is a short movement skill is something you can do. And so you can move as move 4 inches, move 4 inches as part of one order. And and at any point during their short movement skill, your opponent could trigger an ARO, an automatic reaction order or something. I forget what the A stands for, but if one of their guys sees you move at any point during those 4 inches, they could take a shot at you. And like moving, I feel like, even as terrain intense as infinity boards can be, infinity tables can be, I feel like moving is the hardest part of the game. Because I always want to move and not get shot.
Yeah.
But the reality, being able to move
Don't
and not
we
get
all?
shot is hard.
Yeah.
You also got to take into account with Infinity is it's not just 4 inches straight forward back. It could be up a ladder, right?
Exactly.
So you may move 2 inches forward and then 2 inches up a building, and that's your 4 inches, leaving you on a ladder. So it gets more complicated. I agree. Some movement does play a role. Again, War Machine Hordes, I think, some of those, they use the inches and you move across. Whereas you look at MCP, I think, is a little bit of a mix, Marvel Crisis Protocol, because they have anywhere on that stick, wherever it bends and touches. And then you have the simpler, Riot Quest or even BattleTech, again, to that extent, where you're this hex-based, or Underworld, right, is a hex-based.
Yeah.
Whereas 3 squares, okay, or 3 hexes, boom, I'm going to move my 3 hexes, right? You're not as bogged down into what you can. Rough terrain, for example, is that terrain rough or not? Do you have things that ignore movement modifiers and everything like that?
Yeah.
So I mean,
and that was
Yeah.
That was kind of what I thought of as the difference is like a movement system that requires precise movement, or as precise as possible through the usage of tape measures or measuring sticks a lot of times, that is varied in inches, I think adds more complexity to a game. Whereas a game that is hex based or square movement based, even just something simple like as simple as it can get, Monopoly. You roll the number of dice, you move that many squares, you can only go forward. That's a very, very simple rule or movement mechanic. Whereas you bump up to something like Riot Quest or even like God Tier, where it's hex-based movement and you can move a certain number of spaces, but you can go in any direction. Or even chess is kind of the next one after that. Or maybe it's in between, because only certain pieces can go backwards, whereas in chess, most pieces can only move forward, or some pieces can only move forward. And again, square-based. And then you get to some other ones like War Machine and Hordes, or Warhammer 40K, where you have movements that are in inches of up to a certain amount.
Or Song of Fire and Ice, Conquest, rank and file games. Even more complicated.
I need to speak to these two real quick. So, like, when it comes to War Machine and Hordes, anytime a base stat like your movement gets changed is like a weird thing. That, like, say charging is your move plus 3 inches, and then running is up to twice your movement, right? And a normal move is just a regular move, but like your speed. We should probably be using the technical terms here, but like the concept of charging was actually one of the most difficult things to weigh, to get and then to weigh. And now, I charge all the time, and it makes sense, and it's no big deal. But it was like this weird, why am I speed plus 3? Why plus 3? That's pretty arbitrary. You know what I mean? And the hardest thing about Song of Ice and Fire, and when it comes to movement, is when your trays overlap. Yeah. Because you do the rotate, and then, or the pivot, and then you can advance your number of inches. And conceptually, it doesn't make sense to me that I could overlap any other tray before I take my inches, like in the pivot. And so that blew my mind when I realized that you could do that. And I was like, this seems kind of abstract for me, and that was a challenge. That's a challenge when it comes to moving on the board.
Yeah. Well, and I think also just the just the simple thing of the difference between individual models and movement trays is in my experience, it felt like the guesstimation in the ability to close a distance with a movement tray compared to an individual model was something that I struggled with a lot when playing Song of Ice and Fire. Was just the way that the measurements all change as soon as you start pivoting to go towards a certain direction, and the difficulty in preemptively trying to measure that. It's really easy to measure off of the center of a model that has a round base, but you get into something that's rectangular where there's different lengths on different sides. It's kind of difficult to measure from the correct part to be able to guess without physically moving it and seeing it. And that is another kind of different complexity.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So
I think we got a good definition.
What's that?
I think we got a good definition of kind of crunchy and some examples in there.
Yeah. We got it's it's kind of it's a debate that you see periodically show up on the Discords and on Facebook and stuff. What kind of games do you personally prefer?
I guess it depends on what you're going for, right? Like, are you trying to go to a competitive scene, I think, or are you trying to, just hang out with your buddies, have a drink, or have some conversation while playing, right? Catch up. Because if I'm playing War Machine or something, it's hard to be like, yeah, so, telling a story, or Friday, oh, by the way, this guy's doing this, and then, oh, this is going to happen. And so, yeah, what we did was, it's hard to go back and forth on it, right? You can't really have a good conversation with somebody and be playing that, I think. Whereas some other games, right, will be a little bit easier for that again. And other times, I think I kind of like a crunchy game on a competitive side because to me, there's usually less. How do I word that? Not necessarily less barrier, but randomness.
Less stuff open to interpretation.
Yeah. And maybe that's a little bit difference between tight and loose rules. But with the crunchy side, there's sometimes a higher level of almost competitiveness. You have to build a skill, right? You really have to take time to get a skill set up to be able to do that math, especially if you're on the clock, because then you have to do that math and those workings and those calculations quickly, all the tracking, everything else going on. Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of my thought is, crunchy is a little bit more on the competitive side. So if I'm kind of doing that, although there is so much to keep track of, maybe you miss something and then that could be good or bad for you. So it's different. Or if you'd like to say, just want to have a weekend with some friends, maybe something that's more on the light side. It's kind of my thought. Kind of separate those two.
Chad, what do you prefer?
I like both. I think both of them have equal places as long as everyone is also kind of on the same page. It's never fun to be that guy that's trying to play something a little bit more fun, and then you run into somebody that's playing or testing a strictly tuned competitive list in War Machine, for example. Like, we've all kind of experienced that as we go in between different things or play various games as we grow as players and stuff. And but on the opposite side of it, something that is light and fun, that is also that I don't get to play very often in general, that I feel like is pretty easy to play is Riot Quest. I think if the barrier of entry wasn't so high as far as like the number of miniatures that you need in order to get the game going, I think it would be an incredibly great introduction to people for people into miniatures games because it is fast. It can be played very fast. The rules are pretty light. There's limited number of actions that you get to play each round, basically, because you only get so many action dice. The stats for attack and damage, or I guess for like health, defense, and movement, are all pretty simple. The attack resolution is very simple because it's a strike-based system. You're counting, grabbing the dice that you need, rolling them, and then counting the number of strikes to see, do you hit the regular defense? Do you hit the higher defense? Okay, if you hit the higher defense, then you do an extra point of damage, and it's always one extra point. And the damage system is also very simple. There's no variability like there is in War Machine, where for each point of damage over the armor, you're doing, for each number rolled over the armor, that's how many points of damage you're doing. Whereas in Riot Quest, it's always very simple. It's always one damage unless you meet other conditions for different things. The other thing that's really great about it that I remember Will Hungerford talking about when they first introduced the game is the simplicity of it is every single character in the game has no more than 3 rules on them, period. They all have 3 rules or less. Some of them do have, 1 or 2 attacks. Some of them have ways to get multiple attacks, but their special abilities, there's only 3 on each card. And a lot of times one of those abilities is a repeated ability through all of a certain class.
Yeah.
Like the rogues all have the ability to move through spaces of other characters. That is intrinsic of them, and that is one of their 3 abilities that's always on there. And then they may have something else. Guards always have the shield guard ability. Fighters always have the charge ability. Those types of things.
And like I said, they're on the card. They're just right there on the card.
Exactly.
You don't need to look at the rule book, nothing. They're just laid out.
Yep.
Well, and they're one-sided cards.
Yeah.
You don't have to flip to the back. Everything's right there in the front.
Yeah. So Riot Quest for that.
Riot Quest has a lot of appeal to it.
Yeah. And it also has complexity to it because of the different heroes and the different styles that they play. And then you add the Riot gear in there, and it adds a lot more complexity to the game. But it does have a pretty tight but fairly loose rule set, or a pretty tight but non-crunchy rule set with a lot of depth to it.
Exactly. That's what you
want.
I feel like it's a tight rule set.
not tight loose. Those are same axis, wrong thing.
I think we use the word light as the opposite of crunchy.
Yeah.
I have a friend who uses the word chewy. You have crunchy and chewy, and I like that. So, but I have a problem in that I like a lot of games for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I could actually choose one that I prefer necessarily, but
I still really like War Machine.
What'd you say?
I said I still really like War Machine. Like I like that it is a tighter.
Well, no, I was gonna answer the question about what you guys all answered, and I didn't have a chance yet.
Yeah,
but I'm definitely the kind of player who likes to chat while we play, and I want to make friends with you while we talk, or while rolling dice and moving figures, and so sometimes crunchy games are hard to do that with, and I'm also the kind of player who doesn't like to argue, and so loose rule sets would. Where there's an open for interpretation on some things, without a third party to be there to adjudicate. I would just pass and say, all right, fine, whatever you think it is, you win. And I'm not sure how good of an experience that is for people. It's not a good experience for me necessarily, and so maybe I like tight, chewy rule sets. Tight where it's clear what it does, but it's not as crunchy. So, which is one of the things that I like, how Joseph McCullough has improved Frostgrave. Second edition of Frostgrave was just released, earlier this year or late last year, I guess, and they made some what I perceive to be pretty minor changes. And it's the core, the heart of the game is still there, and really what he did was just kind of clean it up a little bit. And Frostgrave was for first edition. I would describe as a light rule set, and but also a loose rule set. And so it was easy to spam and easy to kind of exploit certain things that were there. And I think with second edition, he tightened it up a bit, and I'm pretty excited about that. So, of course, currently we're still playing first edition, but
hence barbarians ruling the field.
Yeah. That's one of the things that he does in for hiring your initial warband. He gives you sort of two categories of soldiers, and I don't remember what the categories are off the top of my head, but one of them is kind of your generic soldier, and then the other one is more of your elite that has more equipment and better stats and can do cooler things, and generally costs more too to hire.
Yeah. Quality over quantity.
And you can only have 4 of those in your list. And so you can't spam them. You can't have 8 barbarians, in your warband or whatever. And so things like that, I think, are steps towards improvement. And it's not all that complicated. All he did was he took one table that took up a whole page and made it 2 small tables that are on a half a page on each side. And so, pick from here, maximum 4, done. It wasn't all that complicated of a fix. So, but I don't know. I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah. I guess one thing we didn't touch too much was narrative play.
Yeah.
If you think a crunchy or a light rule set's a little bit better for narrative or not. Always kind of.
Yeah, I think a lighter rule set probably would be a little better, because a lot of times what you see, especially with miniatures for narrative, is you have unique scenarios that kind of say, okay, for this scenario, these are the rules that apply here. And so they, and they may not necessarily jive 100% with the rules of the game itself. And so if you're going to go into narrative play, you kind of have to know that it's going to be a little bit lighter.
Yeah, I agree. Because, one side of some crunchy narratives could feel kind of railroad, I guess, whereas this is the direction it's going to go, and you kind of gotta go this way in order to, like you said, match up with like a main game or something. Whereas a lighter might be a little bit more fun or enjoyable with some freedom to play, I would think.
Well, when you feel like you have agency, like when your actions affect the story, fun.
Well, and also the other thing too is, like, it's kind of interesting to think that narrative play is more loose, or kind of a lighter style of play, when narrative is, by definition, you're telling a story. It's a continuation. It's multiple events building on top of each other, which means that you are usually gaining experience, gaining equipment, losing people, gaining injuries, which add a lot more complexity to the game because it adds a lot more stuff to track. But it's often thought of as a much more light or fun way to play the game. Like, just even in Frostgrave, like you were talking about earlier, is like, in a game of War Machine, if your guys died, they're still alive when you go to the next round or you sit down for the next game. But in Frostgrave, because it's a continuing, growing experience, there's a chance that something that you've been playing with for 4 or 5 games gets injured, either critically injured, now they're less effective in the future, or they die and you have to replace them and start over.
That's right.
And that could be a very debilitating situation for something that is very frequently thought of as being a less competitive and more fun variant on playing a miniatures game.
Yeah, good point.
I think
it just scratches a different itch a little bit.
Yeah. I think what I like to do is extend an invitation to our listeners. What do you think about our definitions that we came up with, crunchy versus light and tight versus loose? What games do you like to play that fall under those categories, or what games do you prefer? Let us know. Get on our Discord server, and pop the question and let's have the conversation. We often have good conversations on our Discord server. So, but yeah, I feel like this topic is one that circles around a lot when a new element gets introduced in a game or something, or a new game comes out, like when Warcry came out. That simplified, Game Workshop very quickly.
Yeah.
It was very nice. It was a big selling point for that game. So
yeah.
But it's something to keep in mind as gamers, right? And so, what's on your hobby desk? What are you building? What are you painting?
I'm working through my King's Empire, the other side army. Like I'm doing the scale 75, kind of the instant color stuff, and it's going pretty well so far. I count up a couple dozen trays, right? Actually, I should really count how many models there are. There was, let's say, 20 odd trays of units, so let's say 60 plus or so figures, right? And I've gotten a lot of basing on a lot of them. I've got, a few of them done. I've only put in 4 to 5 hours so far. And, I'd say I'm easily a quarter to a third of the way through.
Wow.
Right.
I would say I'm impressed by that. And I'm super jealous.
Yeah.
Because my other side army has been built and sitting in the garage for 2 years now, and with no paint on it, because I didn't know anybody had an army, and now I know you have an army, and I'm gonna have to pull it out and start painting it.
Yeah,
that's what I am.
Yeah, well, it's good. I want to play it. It's a game I want to play.
Right.
What about you, Chad?
I have been working on my unit of Space Wolf Assault Intercessors today. Actually, I've been putting a bunch of color on them, working through them slowly, one color at a time. So I've got those that I'm doing, and then I'm gonna once I get them done, I think I'm gonna work on getting my Wintertime Wasteland stuff assembled. Probably not gonna get started. Well, if I get it assembled. Since the store is closed right now, while we're on a vacation, I might be able to go and get some stuff primed in the store and then pick it up the next day. And then maybe start working on painting them. But that's going to be the next project that I work on once I get done with these Space Wolves stuff.
Nice.
Try and catch up. I was putting together an entire list of all of my unpainted miniatures for a goal to try and work on for 2021, and it is a very, 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 very long list.
You're not supposed to do that, Chad. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can lighten the load by just selling my troll army.
You just got that army,
right?
I mostly got it because it was trade, and it was a good straight across trade to do.
Yeah.
But there's so many troll players out here. I don't know if I want to play them.
Yeah. Well, that is one way of reducing your list, is reducing your models on the list.
Yeah, that's over 100 models.
Yeah.
That's a chunk of an army.
But if it's possible, I want an all trolls team for the virtual WTC. Waiting for further announcement of who can all qualify for that. But I think it'd be fun.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm ashamed because I have done zero hobbying between our last episode and this one. So just with the New Year's holiday and doing just hanging out with Laura and stuff. Laura took a few days off of work, which means I took a few days off of work, kind of thing, or tried to. I tried to, actually. I wasn't very good at that. I still ended up working a little bit, but I have a few New Year's resolutions. One of them involves the hobby, and so I aim to make some good progress this year. So it's nice to get started. So, hey, want to thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for being a part of the conversation. And we look forward to hearing from you on what you think about different games that we all play. And we would love also for you to tell your friends about us. And so that's the best way for us to get out there and for people to join our community. If you go to spellstormminiatures.com, you can find all of the links for everything, our Facebook page, our Discord server, our t-shirts, you can support us there. And we have other links too that we ought to share. We'll get those up too. But thank you for being a part of our community. Also want to put out a plug. If you're on our Discord server, Thursdays, 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we host a paint party every week. And it's fun. We just get on and we hobby. And while we're hobbying, we talk about random things. And usually someone will post a topic. And so we just kind of shoot the breeze about that topic while we all hobby together. And it's a fun way to just keep us accountable and build community. So join us there. We would love to see you. Thanks.